I had met actually through Elaine at the Dr. King breakfast. And so I wrote to her right away saying, when I get back, we have to talk. Yeah, please make time for me. Of course, they went, oh, just come by, you know. So anyway, I went back. So I talked to her, and she said, I said, well, can we work together? She said, yes. She didn't hesitate. She said, this is it. I'm doing it with you. So
I had no idea what she was going to ask.
Wow. So here we go. I do want to say that, you know, I'd like to finish with the part of the story that, you know, I thought, okay, we'll go to and get a whole bunch of people. We'll go to Africa. We'll walk the history and then come back. And anyway, she said, no, I'm going to do this work with you, but it's not going to be that. She said, you have to understand, from the African descent people's spirit, we have to go back to Africa. The separation, the cleavage, the sundering that is so harmful has to be healed. And so we have to, and we also don't want to end up at the exact same spot we are now. We want to end up in a different spot. So she gave the direction, and she said we have to talk to Dr. Bracey about the history, get guided by the history, and he was all in, he was wonderful. And she also named it, this is my last point, I had no idea what to name, I just know I needed to walk and get other people to walk. That's all I knew, actually, that's as far as my consciousness went. But she said, let's call it the same thing as Sri Lanka, the Interfaith pilgrimage of all faiths, and of, in this case, of the Middle Passage, and most people might not even know what that means. We'll have a subtitle, Retracing the Journey of Slavery. And so that's what we named it. And she also said the Middle Passage because she said it's not focused on enough. None of this is focused on enough. But the Middle Passage, there is such a need to bring prayer and connection and healing and consciousness around the Middle Passage itself. So that's all I'm going to say for now. And the naming of it, I have to say, was like naming a child. It brought it into life, and by people walking, you know, this child pilgrimage, you know, grew. Thank you.
Now I'm going to add to the story, because at that time we had no idea what was happening simultaneously in West Africa, and we didn't find out until 6 years later, once the pilgrimage began. And I got a telephone call. We had a headquarters here in Western Mass, and then we had a headquarters in the South to help to organize the Deep South from Atlanta down to New Orleans. And so the group, I think you were in North Carolina at the time, and I was at the headquarters in Atlanta. And Elaine Kenseth, who is the godmother of the pilgrimage, and our home-based liaison, just raise your hand, Elaine, so they could see you, okay? An integral part of the pilgrimage. She was the glue that kept it together. And Elaine called me and said, you're going to get a phone call from this British guy who is a professor in Louisiana somewhere. And he has an idea for you for West Africa. And I was like, okay, here we go. You know, another white man telling black people what they should be doing in Africa. I was a bit of a cynic back then. The pilgrimage has changed and I've calmed down. But anyway, I get this phone call about a half hour later. She gave me the heads up, you know. So this guy gets on the phone and says, I want you to know that I just think what you're doing is wonderful, it's splendid. And, you know, are you going to Benin? And I said, absolutely, yeah, we're definitely going to Benin. He said, said, are you going to Ouida? And I says, at that point, I must be honest, I had never heard of Ouida. Right? I says, well, I'm not sure. Well, you must go. I said, well, here it comes. So I says, well, I'm not organizing the African continent. We have someone doing that for us because she lives on the continent. Her name is Dr. Phyllis Bird. She's a Baptist minister. She lives in Kenya, and she's a member of the All Africa Council of Churches, and she's doing it through that organization. And he says, well, you must talk to her and tell her she must put Ouida if she doesn't have it on your itinerary. And I says, well, I really don't want to put too much more on her plate. She's doing so much for us, you know. No, you must go, and I'm going to tell you why. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure you are. So he begins to say that he says, I just returned from Ouida. And he teaches world religions, and he was writing a book. And so he went to Ouida to interview a Vodun priest who was at that time the supreme patriarch of Vodun, and it's centered in Ouida, which used to be Dahomey. If anybody saw the movie Woman King, that's those people. So anyway, all of it, yes, that whole Dahomey region, right? Yeah. And so we have a lot to talk about, Abizera. I can't wait. And so he says, and so he interviewed this priest, and come to find out from him that he had started making a prayer on the beach in the early 90s. Okay, so stay with me. Are you with me? Yeah. For the children of the stolen ones to come home. This was every morning, diligently. I imagine sunrise, but I'm dramatic, but it probably was sunrise every day. And so I was like, are you serious? He said, yeah. And he says, so don't you understand? He says, I listened just a couple of days ago to an interview on NPR with you and Sister Claire. And Claire talked about having this epiphany in Sri Lanka about making a pilgrimage with the descendants of the Africans that were stolen. Don't you see? And then he got very passionate, you know. Don't you see? She received Dagbo's prayer. She received that because she was there early 90s. He was making this prayer during the, and we just imagine his prayer, his call going across the world, you know, to Sri Lanka, to Sister Claire's heart, you know. And I was like, oh, I guess we're going to Ouida. Can't fight you on this one. And I says, well, I'll have to, you know, talk to Dr. Bird and see if she might have some contacts there. He says, no, you have contacts. Do you have a pen and paper? I said, yeah, take this name down. And the name was Martine de Souza, who was a student of this priest, Dagbo. She worked closely with him. And she also worked at the African Museum in Ouida. He said, she's waiting for your call. Here's her phone number. Here's her email address. Please. And so we did. We made contact. And we ended up going to Ouida. Ouida is a very special place. So now, you don't mind my mentioning, when we came back after the pilgrimage, okay, so like fast forward, you know, 1 year later, we came back and we were here at the Peace Pagoda, and we had just finished a puja, and this regal, amazing, powerful man walked into the prayer room and did a blessing and left. And we all sat there and said, what just happened? And Toby Shoney, my brother here, leans over and he says, do you know who that is? And I says, no. He says, that's Dagbo's grandson. So the priest that was living the prayer. So you see how the ancestors work? It's real. So when you call on your ancestors, it's real, and they hear you. They hear you, and they bring you the solutions that you need when you speak to them. You know, never forget that. And that was my epiphany. I was like, wow, that really works. You know? And so I want to thank Sister Claire for receiving that message and honoring me with the role and the task to partner with her as co-founders and director of the Interfaith Pilgrimage of the Middle Passage. We're coming upon our 25th year. The pilgrimage started, we set foot to pavement, foot to ground, foot to earth, almost 25 years ago. Out of the pilgrimage are many legacies, because each of us that traveled on that very arduous spiritual journey never stopped. So the pilgrimage has continued all those years in many, many different ways. You're going to hear from Brother North Star Medicine Walker, who's going to share just a bit of his journey after the pilgrimage and how it changed his life and the trajectory of the way he moves in the world now. You know, another legacy of the pilgrimage is the Crossing the Waters Institute for Cultural Exchange, an organization that I began so that I could continue the work of the pilgrimage. Pilgrimage never ended. We thought it ended. Sometimes we hoped that it ended. But we couldn't stop. Once you make a journey like that, you can't stop. And it gives you energy, and it gives you spiritual energy to continue doing the work, because we saw the difference that it made in people's lives and in our lives and the people that we met and that we, spoke